Okay. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. After our session last month, there were lots and lots of questions about metrics and how do we measure Agile projects and how do we report up to management and what kind of things are important to them. And Joe and I have spent several months working together at this point, and we started talking about maybe some things that I could share with you guys just from my own experience from projects. I've been a project manager for about 5 years, working with ThoughtWorks for 4, doing Agile type management. So again, I don't have all the answers, but I can share lots of experiences with you, and we can talk about different audiences and how do you tailor your delivery to certain audiences and what kind of things are important to report, et cetera, et cetera. I hope this is more of a discussion than a lecture. So I'm just going to show you some things and talk you through why I was generating certain metrics for various projects, and feel free to shout out questions and we'll talk about it. Okay, so we're thinking, if we think about metrics specifically, why, how, and who do we generate metrics for? So for Agile specifically, those of us who have come from a waterfall background, we know that in reality we have much, much more data than you could ever possibly use. Sitting in a co-located team, gathering actuals from your team on the stories that they're working on, story points and tasks and blah, blah, blah. I mean, we have so many actuals and so much data that we can actually generate. It's just a matter of putting it together for the appropriate audience. Sometimes generating metrics for specific people, for stakeholders, or for even frontline managers, increases our credibility within the organization that we're working in, right? Because Agile does kind of have that reputation of being kind of fly by the seat of your pants sometimes, when in reality it's not. We have very strict boundaries and specific guidelines that we follow. A lot of times we generate metrics just to support the PMO because we have to fit in with whatever organization we're in, and this is a little bit different, right? But most importantly for me, if someone asks me why I generate specific metrics for a team, it's definitely to sharpen the team. The goal of the project manager is to create a well-oiled delivery machine, right? So we're setting out to sharpen our team by generating metrics that make them better. Again, when you're generating metrics, you want to think specifically about the audience. And I think about this a lot as a consultant, and you want to definitely use a common vocabulary. When you're talking to people for the first time, try as much as you can to avoid some of the Agile terminology that is new to them until you bring them up to speed so that they don't feel very overwhelmed by everything you're saying. Okay? Who does a lot of the metric generation? Typically the project manager. We have a role at ThoughtWorks that we call an iteration manager, which is someone who manages more downward within the iteration than upward and outward. So either of those people would generate the metrics. Okay, here's my word to the wise. I caution everyone on this. Be very careful what you measure. We can measure anything. We can tell you on a daily basis who does what, who's more productive than another person. Be very, very careful with that information. It's good information to have. It's good for generating lots of different metrics, but again, know your audience. Who are you presenting to? Any type of CEO doesn't want to see that kind of detail. We need to roll it up on a very high level and understand what their goals are. Is their goal to make their organization more agile? Or is their goal to have better time to market? Or is their goal to have things done faster, better, cheaper? Whatever their specific goal is, we can target metrics for that audience. But I can guarantee you it's not at the detailed level. Stakeholders, again, have their own specific goals, and we need to be very careful not to inundate them with too much information that isn't appropriate. Frontline managers need to know different things, as well as core team members. So frontline managers are ones that we have to be very careful of. I had a horror story once at a client where a frontline manager wanted individual velocity for each team member so that he could base their compensation on it. It was like a nightmare. Like, of course, I have that information, but no, you can't have it. It's driving the wrong behavior, right? I mean, so when you have the power to generate that kind of information, be very, very careful what you wish for, because you may get to situations where you don't want to give out that kind of information. That's okay. Just understand your audience and be able to defend why that would be the wrong way to compensate people, for example. Then, of course, there's the core team. The core team needs most of the information, right? Because, again, if we're sharpening ourselves, what we're doing is looking for, there's no really wrong answer. Well, as we look through these metrics, it's not that we're looking for things saying, oh, this is wrong or that's wrong. It's really, is this an acceptable scenario for this team? Is this an acceptable delivery rate for this team? Or does the team need to take ownership of changing the situation? Again, explaining the how, what, and why of what you're doing. So when I start out at a client and I go through metrics with them, very patiently explain to them what they're seeing, because they're seeing things for the first time that they've never seen before. Most people have never heard of a burn-up chart or a burn-down chart or velocity or things that are very common vocabulary to us in Agile. So we want to be very careful to explain what we're showing them, where we got the data from, and what they should be reading, what's valuable to them in that particular metric. Intent and appropriate usage is another one. So it's just, again, being very careful to help managers and stakeholders and everyone who comes to your iteration planning meetings or close of iteration or whatever those regular meetings are that you have, making sure that they understand the intent and purpose of what they're seeing and the appropriate usage, so that they don't accidentally take something out of context, take it out of the room, and make it appear to the rest of the organization that the team is not doing X, Y, or Z. Because that can definitely happen if people don't really understand what specifically they're looking at or what they should use it for. When all else fails, use discretion when sharing data outside of the core team. So that's the example that I gave you with the manager who wanted to use certain things that were inappropriate to use for compensation, right? At a certain point, we just had to draw the line on what we communicated outside of the core team. Was personal velocity of interest to the team? Yeah, it was interesting to them. Did they want to be judged against it and paid accordingly? No. Should they have been? No. But it was interesting to them because they were able to then push themselves a little bit more, become a little bit more efficient. So, any questions so far? Yeah.
Yeah, the example that you're using. So how do you I understand that we want to promote team dynamic and team productivity as opposed to individual productivity, but how do you relate that back to compensation decisions?
That's another big discussion, because most organizations are built around individual compensation for individual effort. My experience has been that if we're reorganizing a group to adopt Agile, we have to bring suggestions to them around different compensation metrics. And it's more about team success, having their teammates evaluate them, success for the project. Did the project come in early with a certain number of defects, different things like that you would use, and everybody then gets the same score, basically, instead of an individual. It's very, very difficult because you're going against pretty standard HR policies, so it's a big uphill battle, but it can be done.
But you're not suggesting that they equalize compensation across different
No,
people?
that would be based on management observation of the entire team working together, and again, of people's evaluation of each other. It's a bit more subjective, but it can, over time, if you continue to measure people individually in a co-located team, all working toward the same goal, you'll drive the wrong behaviors. Because people will not they'll be less willing to help out their development pair or help someone else out if it's going to ding them in some way. So that's a much longer discussion that we can have at another time. But anything else? Okay, let's look at some examples. Joe, you're going to keep me up on time? Okay, thanks. So here's just some examples. I'm not going to show you an example of everything that's up here today, but these were some things I was thinking about, again, based on our discussion last month. So when we're talking about reporting upward, some certain things that we want to be sure to show to management, again, based on the audiences, some type of status report. I'll show you a couple examples of like a 4-quadrant, 1-page status report, a different dashboard that might be good for management. But I also think when you're reporting upward, at some point you need to get management to get used to looking at a burn-up chart. Because to me, that's our most important metric, right? That tells us what we've accomplished toward our scope and projects out where we're going. So that gives you a lot of information about the status of the project. And then, like I already mentioned, dashboards. I'll show you one example that I have of a dashboard. Downward. So there's a lot more that we generate going downward, right, into the team. This is just my personal opinion. I always show a burn-up chart, always show a velocity chart, every single iteration planning meeting, whether that's every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever you do. I have another metric that I like that usually brings up quite a bit of discussion. It's called, it's a lean measure. I call it finger charts because the graph kind of looks like a hand. So I'll show you guys that. It's kind of an interesting way to measure lean practices within your team. Lots of other metrics that are optional: efficiency tracking, availability, utilization, estimation accuracy. There's lots of different development metrics that you can look at, such as unit tests, code toxicity, things like that. With things like efficiency, availability, utilization, these are things that are definitely case by case, right? If you have a team that is fully dedicated to your project, they have very little to no outside distraction, these are not useful metrics. But if you have a team that really suffers with what I like to refer to as time slicing, where they've got all different kinds of projects they're working on and they're pulled in all different directions, making visible something like how efficient the team is or what their availability has been can help management help you make the team more available. Yes?
What's the difference between velocity and efficiency?
Velocity is simply the number of story points. It's speed. It's the number of story points the team delivers. Efficiency would be something along the lines of, with their daily time, how efficient are they allowed to be? Such as, in an 8-hour day, how much time are they allowed to spend in the team room? Something like that.
So upward is to management to understand the status of the project. Downward is routine.
Correct.
So you don't show management velocity and estimation accuracy. I mean, I would be very scared to show them that because it could be scary.
Mm-hmm.
Why is the velocity so low this time? Throw more people at it. Why are they so bad at estimating? What's the problem?
Right.
I mean, those are things I wouldn't want to show them.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So you don't? I mean, I'm asking if you include that in the status report. I mean, I don't like that. I'd be very scared to show my management team those things.
I wouldn't necessarily include those in the status report. Those would be things I would show to the team. Now, keep in mind, when you're showing a burn-up chart, the velocity is there, right? It's a cumulative velocity going up. The most important thing, though, is to help people know what to do with the data. The data is just data, but they have to understand how to interpret it. For instance, estimation accuracy is a really tricky one, right? Because people look at it and go, well, why aren't we striving for 100%? Why wouldn't we want to be 100% accurate? Well, no, that's not the right answer. The way to use the data appropriately is to look for consistency and patterns, because you can plan based on that. So part of this is a little bit of patience with your management, too, to educate them on what they're looking at and what is the goal. Again, the goal is not perfection. The goal is standardization so you can plan. But yeah, I'm with you. Estimation accuracy is always a tricky one. And when I show that inside the team room, inevitably there's somebody sitting around that asks the question and then wants to show it to somebody else's manager. And it's definitely a tricky one. Any other questions? Okay, let's look at some actual metrics. This is stuff that gets me all jazzed, okay? Okay, so I've got 2 samples of burn-ups. This is probably very, very familiar to you guys. The one we're looking at here, again, think about your project levers. We've got scope, time, quality, staff, right? So this one we're looking at has a fixed scope. So all we're doing here is trending, saying this is what our initial forecast was, this is how much we've completed and where we're projecting to be, and clearly this is a fixed scope project, so we're not going to make it by the end of March, right? So that's a really good example of a fixed scope burn-up chart. Does that make sense to everybody? Is this something that looks familiar or things that you typically use? Okay, all right. This one seems a little more practical to me. I'm not typically on fixed scope projects. It's more of a fixed time, like we have to release by X date kind of thing. So this is an example of a fixed time burn-up chart, right? The red line down at the end by iteration 28 represents the time when we have to release by. So we can see that the scope continues to fluctuate, and then it goes back down to the point where it looks like our burn-up, the solid blue, and then the dotted blue is our projection based on an average velocity. and then the target that we would have to hit, that we would have had to hit from here to get there, it looks like they're in line. Now, I can tell you from this project, this is only in line because the iteration manager continued to force the customer to reduce scope. So forcing him to continue to decrease, because the team's average velocity was just not changing. It was what it was, and that's okay. We just have to accept it and now adjust the scope if the time can't change.
So this one's around week 17, the last conversation about scope settled down.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was it was crazy. He wanted everything, but don't they all? Any questions?
Is the stakeholder happy by week 28, given the reality of the situation?
I don't know the answer to that.
Does this also assume that we need to know the scope of the entire project, really at the beginning, to be able to estimate and get that story point?
So that isn't that assumption is not made here, because if you look at the chart, this is only representing iteration 12 through 32. There were 11 previous iterations that were more of a pilot phase. And we spent a lot of time, while we were delivering, doing a lot of prototyping and delivering, we also spent a lot of time fleshing out requirements. So there was a lot, yes, there was a lot of work done ahead of time, but it was still done in an agile fashion, like gradually, story by story. Any other questions on this one?
What are those little things minus 4.5, minus 4?
Actually, that looks like I forgot to update them. Sorry about that. Those were just checkpoint boxes that I was saying, if we stay with this current pace, by this iteration, we'll either be on schedule by this number of story points, we'll be behind schedule by this number of story points. I apologize, I forgot to update them, but with the latest data, because now they are going to be on target.
If I understand this correctly, this is a point in time at week 17,
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
assuming the fixed scope on the red line, and then in the assumption of a fixed velocity from week 16 or a split duration beyond.
Yes. I'm anticipating, to get that fixed velocity that you referred to, I'm using an average velocity of all the data that I have from the past several iterations for the team. Because, the velocity does fluctuate from iteration to iteration, right? So just using yesterday's weather wouldn't be the most accurate. If you're going to project something out for several months, you'd probably want to use an average velocity. If the team has stayed pretty stagnant, I'll use them all. But if the team has fluctuated quite a bit, then I'll use the iterations where the team has been stagnant. So in this case, I was actually only using 12 through 17 for the average, because iterations 1 through 11, we had quite a bit of churn, and none of the same team members were remaining. Well, maybe very few, sorry.
I think it's really how you actually get the customer to cut back on the scope and whether these parts of the metrics actually help in the process or not.
So I have to say that they do help. My mantra lately has been, the data doesn't lie. Like, I can't finagle this chart to tell them that they're going to be on time if they're not. It's in plain daylight. If they don't agree with the average velocity, I'm sorry, then they don't agree with math. It's very simple. As to whether or not they adjust the scope, that's clearly up to them. It's not up to me to make that decision. It's up to me to provide them with the information, with all the data, let them come to the conclusion that they are not, in fact, going to make their date if everything stays the same, and something has to give. Either the date has to be pushed, or they have to give up some kind of functionality. It's not my decision to make. I don't care one way or the other which one they choose.
Do you find that this chart and the metrics help your case?
I do. I actually find this to be the most useful chart that I show to anybody. Because, again, this projection doesn't show it, right? But let's pretend that this projection actually matched my little text boxes here and showed that the dotted blue line was coming out here. Well, what do you want me to do with that information? They're not going to meet their date. They're going to be 2 iterations late. That's in this project, these are 2-week iterations, so that's an entire month late. Is that okay? If that's an okay answer, if the customer feels like they can go back to their boss and stretch out the date for two iterations, that's fine with me too. But I do feel like this is a very useful chart because it doesn't, there's nothing hiding here. I mean, we have to make a decision or we have to accept that we have to move the date.
And, you know, I've been on recent projects, I came in and I happened to come in on iteration 5 and I had run the iteration planning meeting and they hadn't been using burnout charts at all. I put this together and they had had a huge scope increase without realizing it. And I did this and I put another line showing where we are currently, this is actually where you're going to deliver, right? And they were like appalled in the meeting, like, oh my God, because it was like 3 months after, and they had a fix, they had to launch on a date. So then they immediately scurried off and got their scope down. So as Tiffany was saying, it is what it is, right? That's reality. You can't change we can't change the team velocity. You could fire the team, if you want to do that. But beyond that, that's your reality. You have to address it, right? And so I think it's really powerful to give that to business people so they understand, like, you either have to reduce scope or we're going to change time.
Well, they don't. They have one other option, which it has nothing to do with metrics, but I don't know how you handle it. Oh my God, we're going to be 2 iterations late. I'll give you 5 more people.
Right, but then...
What do you do in that case? Because that's a recourse.
Right, you readjust on your velocity, but, you hand out the mythical man month.
Right, you and I know that doesn't work with
No, but
velocity.
you show that actually velocity, that it's a team, and this is where too, when you are talking about, it's not individual velocity, it's team velocity. So while you can double the size of the team, right, you're going to have ramp up, and you're also going to have decreased velocity in total anyway, because communication, et cetera.
Sure.
And you have to show that, so although they can increase the cost, they can do this, they're still going to only come in at X. It is one of the options, obviously, but it's not a linear, like, double the team, double your velocity.
I agree, I believe it is. And that's
But you have to show to them, I think, show that what your forecasted velocity would be with that team and the associated cost, but also that it's not going to be a double, right?
Maybe you need to show the calculation of velocity. To
Right.
show that, adding 5 more people, I have 1, 1, 1, 1, not 10, 10, 10, 10.
Right,
Right,
and
I think it's
that's,
not an idea.
Let's
Sorry.
just jump in here because we have so little time.
No,
and
it's
we can
okay.
take that afterwards, but I'm not sure if you have more charting.
Oh my, I have so many more charts. It's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're also, I think, making the assumption of fixed quality of product. You can always deliver on time if you ship junk.
Mm-hmm.
What are those assumptions? How do you know what your current product quality is?
Well, this velocity that I'm charting is based on the acceptable quality of my team right now. I mean, I am also tracking defects. I know what is expected of them as far as keeping the number of defects down. Of course, if management wanted to cut the quality, they could. I mean, my argument to them would be, you're just going to pay for it later because you're going to launch into UAT and you're going to pay for it later. So.
Their call on a lot of
It is their call. But again, going back to this lady's question, the data doesn't lie. It is what it is, but it forces the discussion, which is what so often we're missing in our standard project practices, is that there's no concrete picture that forces a discussion and a decision.
This relies on one team. I have an environment with 3 teams, with obviously different velocities, all working on the same project. So how can we use a burnout chart for that?
I would track them separately. Because you can't
But you would
compare
need to know
velocity
what-
across teams.
Right, but you would need to know what each of the teams would be working on ahead of time.
Correct. Yes, but you'd have to track them separately. Okay. Yeah. So I had a lot more stuff to go through along. Let me just ask you a quick question before I launch into this. Lean is pretty hot in Agile right now. Is that of interest to people? Can we have a show of hands, like majority of people that want to go through this quickly? Okay, because it's either that or it's some management level PMO type dashboard stuff. We can't go through everything. So let's look at this one Lean metric very quickly, maybe. There we go. Okay, this is one of my favorites. There's a lot going on here, but I promise you once I walk you through it, it'll make quite a bit of sense. So keep in mind, Lean is about eliminating waste, right? We're constantly analyzing our process and trying to eliminate waste and eliminate bottlenecks and keep the process flowing smoothly. Sorry. So what we're looking at here is a chart that tracks all the different life cycles of stories, right? Every story that travels through our team goes through the standard life cycle. It has to move from a place where it's not touched at all to a place where it's completed, meaning signed off by the customer, right? So in every one of those project life cycles, there's room for waste. And what we're trying to do with this kind of a picture that looks a little confusing, what we're trying to do is highlight where the bottlenecks are and where the potentials are for waste so we can clean that up and keep the team as efficient as possible. The reason it's called a finger chart, this was actually termed by a guy from ThoughtWorks by the name of Fred George, because it kind of looks like fingers. If every specific category is proportionally where it should be, it actually kind of looks like fingers. Kind of a retarded name, but you know, it is what it is. So what I'm looking at here is a lot of disproportion, and I'm going to kind of walk you through, if I'm analyzing something like this and showing it to the team, what are the things that I'm looking for that are risk areas for them, right? So let's start from the top. What we've got here is a section that is not started. So these are all of my stories. This is not story points. These are number of stories. So these are all of my stories that are not yet started. And then as they go this direction toward approved, they go into analysis, and then into an area we call awaiting development. I mean, you can have fewer categories than I have, but you get the same gist here. We go into awaiting development, then when the developers pick it up, it moves into in development. We have a category on this team called BA volleyball, which is kind of a pre-testing phase where you let the BAs kind of sanitize things for business sensibility after the developers have actually written the functionality. And then they see, you know, if they like it and if it's good, and then it should pass on to QA. From that point, it moves into awaiting testing. Then when the testers pick it up, it's in testing, awaiting approval, and then done. Okay. So what we're looking for on something like this is peaks and valleys, very sharp stair steps. Those are things that would show us some risk. And we're also looking for when these different bars are not the same proportionally, because that tells me that somebody's either working too far in advance and they're going to have to potentially do some rework, and that creates waste, or there's not enough available for a specific group of people to work on.
What's on the x-axis?
This one, these are just dates. It's days, actually. Yeah, time, sorry. So let me talk about some things that I see as potential risks here. Number one, first of all, you can see that the scope continues to go up at an insane rate, right? I mean, there's very little control. So even if things are moving down this direction at a reasonable rate, we're not keeping up here. The rate at which approval is done, it's just not going to catch the total scope for quite some time, right? So that's one potential risk. A bigger risk for me is that very consistently here, I see in analysis is much, much thicker than development. So what that tells me is that these analysts are working multiple iterations ahead of the developers. Like, I'm not talking 1 or 2 here. I'm talking 3, 4. And on this project, an iteration was 2 weeks long. So we're now talking, they're like potentially 2 months ahead of the developers. Come on, right? Like by the time we reprioritize all that stuff, those stories are going to have to be rewritten. We've created so much waste that the analysts are just churning and churning and churning. So we were constantly working on this project to get that down. We did a little bit, toward the end, but that was a really hard one for them to absorb, is that they couldn't work so far in advance. We had a big bucket here in awaiting development, was much bigger than what was actually in development. That's another waste area, right? Because we've got these stories here that are done, waiting for developers. By the time they get to them, they may be obsolete or they may have changed, right? Let's see. Here's the only other one I'll bring to your attention here. These stair steps of completion. This is a risk area because it tells me that stories aren't getting completed until right at the very end of the iteration. We'll go for several days without delivering anything, and then, we get credit for everything. So what happens if 5 of my developers are out sick on that day before the iteration closes? That means that we're not actually going to get credit for that work because we let it go for so long. So a much steadier stream would be healthy. Like this is much healthier right here. So these are some things that you're looking for to identify. You can see all of this on your story card wall. It's all there. But sometimes it takes a picture to actually make it more meaningful to try to feel through things. So.
Tiffany, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But I think everybody saw the slides she was flipping through. I think we need to back.
Okay.
Talk more wanted to speak, but definitely.